Okay, good morning. So I'd like to introduce Patrick Rice with the Science Center of Iowa. So Patrick, please take it away.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. But before I do want to just highlight back to that toolbar that Crystal had just mentioned. Definitely the mute and the chat features are two important features to know about and where those are. Also, the reaction button. I always like to throw that one out there as well. That it's kind of a fun little addition to virtual programming also. So with that, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. All right. And everyone should see basically a big purple screen that says Reimagine Engineering with Girls Leading the Way. All right. And I just want to verify, can you see everything looks great? Perfect. All right. So, all right. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you for your interest in this topic. And also looking at engineering, but also looking at engineering through an equity lens. Like Crystal said, my name is Patrick Rice. I'm the Director of Learning Experiences here at the Science Center of Iowa in Des Moines. And Crystal has already introduced herself. I just also want to point out that you may see in the background behind me lights come on. If you see a Tyrannosaur skull, that's our traveling exhibit, a T-Rex named Sue. So there it is popping up right now. So I just want to start off by saying that I know that there's been a lot of discussion in recent years knowing and understanding what STEM is specifically, as well as increasing the interest in STEM fields with our youth. And over the years, we've kind of seen that really grow in interest, as well as just knowledge what is STEM. But one area that we wanted to highlight today was specifically around engineering, but looking at engineering through the diversity lens, specifically around gender. In today's discussion, we'll bring to light some of those reasons why and how, as out-of-school providers, we might be able to address this disparity that we're seeing in engineering, specifically when it comes to the gender disparity. With that, I'm going to go ahead and there we go. I have to move my my camera real quick. There we go. All right. With that, I do want to highlight. Whoops. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of that. There we go. With that, I want to highlight what Crystal had already talked about making sure that your microphones are on mute and also then that your chat window is open. Crystal will be managing the chat options, so you may hear her chime in every now and then throughout the presentation with some questions or comments that you may add to the discussion. There will be times that I directly ask the group questions, and your participation in the chat is one way that we can engage in that conversation, because we all know that when we're working together, when we're hearing different voices, we're able to advance the conversation in a different direction than if it was just led by one person. If you do have any questions, please be sure to let us know in that chat window. This quote of today's science fiction is tomorrow's science fact. It just kind of rang true with me. Every time I see this, it's something that I keep on reminding myself of, that it's like the things that we're thinking about today of just like, oh, that's 50 years in the future. Well, eventually that is going to be science fact. It's so fitting today when we take a step back and think about what just happened this weekend. NASA launched its newest crew of astronauts to the ISS, the International Space Station, on the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, which is the first operational flight combining NASA and the private sector of SpaceX. Seeing that, I don't know, a few years back, I know that they did a live recording of the first stage of the rockets being lifted off into outer space and then coming back and actually landing on the ground. And seeing something like that literally took me back to where Patrick in the 1990s was like, this is only something that we could see in comic books or on the Sci-Fi Channel or something. But in today, we're seeing it happen in real life. In February of 2021, so just in a few months, the Perseverance rover will be landing on the surface of Mars. whose mission it will start paving the way for human habitation. Thinking about the science fiction of the 1990s, and I don't know if anyone remembers the movie Total Recall, but thinking about life on Mars, and seeing it literally happen before our eyes in 2020 are the products of countless engineers working on these projects. And it's so exciting to think about what the next 20 years is going to bring to life. If you notice at the bottom of your screen, I want to highlight some of the organizations that have helped bring this presentation series to life. Over 10 years ago, there was a small group of nonprofits and state organizations that came together forming the Iowa STEM Active Learning Community Partners. Over the years, this group has ebbed and flowed with new organizations joining and some venturing off into new experiences. But this group has stayed committed over the years to increasing increasing access and participation in quality STEM experiences. Today, this group has representation from the Iowa After School Alliance, the Blank Park Zoo, the Iowa Children's Museum, and the Science Center of Iowa. Together, even during these turbulent times of a lot of unknowns, this group has found ways to stay committed and to find opportunities to still provide out-of-school and in-school providers with quality STEM educational topics and professional development like this one. And each of these organizations will take part in this series of presentations. And these presentations I do want to highlight is only made available because of the Million Girls Moonshot program, which we'll highlight more in just a bit. But to get ourselves started in that chat window, we're going to be opening this up. I want to ask this question starting off of saying, what is your comfortability level with teaching or leading or discussing topics focused around engineering activities? Or put it another way, when I say the word engineer, what feelings begin to surface? In the chat, please use a rating scale of 1 to 4, with 1 meaning that you find something around engineering pretty intimidating and you might shy away from teaching that subject, or you might let somebody else take the lead in that area. And a 4 might be, I got this, it's second nature. I can whip something out of my back pocket in a given moment. So go ahead in the chat and rate yourself either a 1, 2, 3, or 4. And we'll give you a few moments on this. And I'll ask Crystal to go ahead and share those results with us.
Yeah, Patrick, we have some scores coming in, and so far we have a 3, a 2, a 1, another 1, and looks like maybe Sylvia might perhaps have been called away, but again, it looks like most people are kind of in that 1 and 2 range.
Gotcha. All right. So yeah, that 1 and 2 range of, it's either kind of intimidating and you may not be too familiar with it, or you might have dipped your toes into the topics a little bit, but you're still pretty unsure. I totally get that. I wanted to start off with that question mainly because there's a lot of words, especially when it comes to science and math, that I hear, and I sometimes still get flustered and get uncomfortable in those situations. And engineering is one of those topics that many people might fit into that category of like, I'm not quite sure. I'm not sure what I'm doing here, but I'm gonna try. And for me, astronomy was by far one of these words, which is kind of ironic that all my backgrounds are astronomy related. But but yeah, astronomy was one of those words that when that topic came up, I was like, I'm not good with this. I kind of want to shy away from it. Space was something that scared me because I didn't understand it. I didn't know what I was looking at. I didn't, four dimensions didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand it. I didn't want to understand it. And so I tended to shut down when these conversations started. I definitely would have been classified as somebody having a fixed mindset of what my knowledge was and understanding around astronomy. And I was fine with that. I even got to the point where I was like, if I could look through a telescope, I was like, no, I'm good. I don't want to understand it. So I know a little bit, and I'm fine with that. I then started to force myself into learning, or at least listening to conversations around astronomy with my groups, and I began to realize that even though it may not be one of my go-to sciences, I'm definitely much more on the life sciences and ecology focused. Um, but I realized that I didn't need to be scared of this topic. I began to allow myself to become vulnerable and begin to move myself into a mindset where I realized that I could grow as a learner around space science. And I explicitly remember when I began to make this shift. One of the programs I oversee at the Science Center is our program called Star Parties, which is a free program where we have a handful of telescopes set up, and we're just looking into the night sky, and we invite the public to come out and view things in space, ranging from the craters on the moon, seeing Mars a little bit more up close, comets. But for me, this shift happened when I first saw the Galilean moons of Jupiter. I've heard about the Galilean moons. I just didn't ever really care to look at them or see learn more about them. The telescope I was looking through was pretty powerful enough for me to not only see the faint light of the four Galilean moons, but I could also see a couple of the bands on the surface of the surface of Jupiter. Now, in fourth grade, I remember handwriting a 3-page report on Jupiter using only the World Book encyclopedias that my parents had. And seeing Jupiter in a telescope 25 years later instantly took me back to that report. And I began to realize that this science of astronomy was something I needed to connect with. It was something that I had pushed away for so many years, and I needed to at least start introducing it again to myself. By moving myself into a growth mindset around space science, I began to reimagine myself and my potential around my understanding when it came to astronomy. I didn't have to be scared of this topic, and I really didn't be scared of this topic that I really didn't understand, to the point where now, even though I'm still really in my infancy stages of understanding this science, I get excited about hearing the latest NASA mission, or seeing photos of Jupiter from the Juno missions, or track where Perseverance is, like I mentioned, is traveling towards Mars and will land in February of 2021. And that's exactly what the Million Girls Moonshot mission is, to reimagine. Let's reimagine who can be an engineer, who can build, who can make. And by doing that, let's reimagine the future. So I've mentioned Million Girls Moonshot a couple times now, but what is it? What is it? Well, Million Girls Moonshot, or you might hear me call it Moonshot for short, is an active out-of-school program that is involved in all 50 states. Their goal is to inspire and prepare the next generation of innovators by engaging 1 million more girls in STEM learning opportunities through after-school and summer programs over the next 5 years. And this is a movement from the STEM Next Opportunity Fund, which some of you may have heard of or may be a little bit more familiar with. So the Million Girls Moonshot program is part of the STEM Next Opportunity Fund. And like I already mentioned, the Iowa STEM Active Learning Community Partners is a collective group of local as in state local anyway, various organizations across the state that work to provide professional development to both in-school and out-of-school providers, focused in on increasing access, inclusion, and the quality of STEM programming. Today, we've identified 3 main goals that our hopes is that we'll be able to see opportunities to create inclusive engineering activities that are designed to engage girls, that help feed the idea of having a growth mindset around engineering principles. I kind of use that term fixed mindset, growth mindset. That fixed mindset example was where I shut down when I heard astronomy because I didn't want to learn, or I felt like my ability to learn was at a fixed amount. So that's that fixed mindset example. Switching it to a growth mindset where you shouldn't be not to be afraid of learning more about that science, knowing that you can grow in your the amount that you can learn about a certain topic, that it's not fixed, it's not limited. Just like my story of astronomy, our hopes is that we instill that sense of wonder and curiosity with our learners around engineering to help keep them inquisitive, keep them brainstorming and trying new ideas to ensure that we're bringing as many voices to the table as possible through an equitable and inclusive learning environment. Now let's take another look at that moonshot mission again and rearrange the words a little bit. Let's replace the word imagine with include. Let's include others in engineering fields. Let's include others while reimagining the future. By broadening this idea of or perception of who can be an engineer, we begin to broaden our impacts and we see new ways of innovating. Now, I've been with the Science Center of Iowa a little shy of 8 years now, and although members of the Science Center staff have been focused on these efforts for several years, it was something that I stepped into actually when I first was employed with the Science Center. The Science Center of Iowa staff and board of directors formalized and adopted a public-facing equity and inclusion statement, which is holding the Science Center more accountable in creating opportunities where participation expands beyond traditional mindsets of engineers or scientists or mathematicians, or who can build, who can code, who can program. And this aligns directly with the Million Girls Moonshot goal of reimagining who can be an engineer. As an institution, we will work toward eliminating inequities for those who have historically been marginalized or underserved by creating welcoming environments which serve all in STEM learning. We will do this. We know that we will only be possible by this will only be made possible by improving community relationships and continually reflecting on our practices to ensure that we are meeting the changing needs of our community and our state. And one of the questions that we kept coming back to when we were moving through this process of creating this equity statement was, what is STEM? Now, I know that may be kind of sound like a silly question for the members of the Science Center to be asking themselves of what is STEM, but we kept coming back to this fundamental question of what is STEM? So as our first icebreaker activity, and quick virtual introduction, what I would like you to do is to go ahead and in the chat window, type your name and the organization that you're with, if you are with an organization, whether that be within a formal learning environment, such as a public school district, or an informal learning environment. I'll give you a few moments to go ahead and enter that into the chat. So again, your name and the organization that you are with, if you are associated with one. And begin to think about how would you answer this question? Okay, so I'm not asking you to type in the chat, how would you answer this question, but I just want you to think of how would you answer this question if we asked you this. And Crystal, if you can give me a, let me know when everyone has entered their name and the organization they're with.
Yes. So we have Emily Harris, who is my coworker with the Iowa After School Alliance. Rhonda with St. Mark Youth Enrichment, Jessica with Blank Park Zoo. Carly is with Audubon Elementary Launch Program. And again, I don't have anything from Sylvia at this point, so.
Gotcha.
But I believe Sylvia is with Des Moines Public Schools, so that I may be misremembering that, but I believe that's who she's with.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for that. We like I said, we know that STEM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and math. But when we were breaking down what is STEM, we asked ourselves, what does it mean beyond those words? So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to call on a couple people. I'm going to ask you to take yourselves off mute and answer that question of how would you answer what is STEM if you got asked that question. So I'll give you just maybe a few more seconds to kind of form your thoughts around that. And then I'm going to call on a couple people. And if you hear your name, I'm going to ask you to please take yourself off mute if you're able to and answer that question of what is STEM. So just a few seconds to kind of form your thoughts. All right. And Jessica, if you could go ahead and take yourself off mute, and how would you answer this question?
So I would answer this question by saying that STEM, simply put, is the use of science, technology, engineering, and math, since that's obviously what the acronym is for. And so using those, whether it's in school and learning, sorry, I have radios going off in the background. If utilizing that like in school, so learning about the principles of those different learning areas, utilizing them in the workplace to make changes or develop new things, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Jessica. You can go and put yourself back on mute. And Emily, if you're able to take yourself off mute, would you be able to give us, how would you explain what is STEM?
Yeah, I think obviously, like Jessica said, there's the obvious what the acronym stands for, but to me, I think STEM kind of has more of a connotation to it. And to me, that connotation, as somebody who has both a daughter and a son, is something that's heavily geared towards boys. It's something that, like, if you go down a toy aisle at any store, you're going to see a lot of STEM-based activities geared towards little boys. You're not going to see so much geared towards little girls. I guess they're getting better at doing that. But even just as somebody who, graduated in the 2000s, I still feel like I was never engaged in STEM and more geared towards like those social sciences and not the hard sciences. So to me, STEM kind of has that that other connotation to it other than just the actual science, technology, engineering, and math.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you. If you can go ahead and put yourself back on mute. Thank you. Thank you all very much for participating with that. Yeah, we were asking ourselves the same question of, like, again, what is STEM? Is it a way of knowing, seeing things differently and seeing the interconnected of those studies and disciplines, like you both had mentioned? It's a way that allows ourselves to, and I'm not saying that I am by any means saying like this is what STEM is, by like that's not what I'm getting at here. It's more question based of like, is it a way of that allows ourselves to be fully ingrained within these studies instead of seeing them separately, but fully ingrained together? And the big question that we asked ourselves is, who gets to decide if this is science versus an old wives' tale? Who gets to decide, like, do the color patterns on a woolly worm that I was told as a child will predict the severity of the winter, upcoming winter? Like, is that science or is that an old wives' tale? Who does, or does the timing of when you plant your potatoes in the ground really determine how well the growing season is going to be? And who gets to decide? To me, STEM is almost like a language. And just like other languages, if you don't speak or understand that language, you are excluded from it. For years, the individual STEM disciplines have been excluded many individuals simply because they didn't quote know the language. And what's worse is that our society was okay with that. Society didn't offer a free version of the Rosetta Stone necessarily for anyone to learn the languages of STEM. It was reserved for specific people based on what society thought you should be able to know what STEM is, or or what science is, and you shouldn't have to worry about it. Now, it was typically based on what you look like or what race or gender you were. And think about that for a minute. When we think about the famous scientists and researchers throughout history that come to mind, and you don't even have to go way back to the 1800s or 1700s or anything like that. Just think about the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And who were those women in STEM that rise to your thinking? Prior to this idea of STEM and teaching these disciplines together, this knowledge was reserved for a few people. You had to register for a math class, and society would tell you if you could take that math class or not. Now it's all ingrained, or it could be ingrained. By showing the unity of these disciplines and teaching them congruently, it opens up that language for others to learn and understand in a whole new way. It shows practical application real time, and it makes the disciplines relevant and connected to us, which it will expand the participation of others. Now, I know this graph at the very top, you'll see ISU, and that may cause some people to like, so I know that this graph is only representative of the Iowa State University, but I also do want to recognize that the University of Iowa also has a College of Engineering as well. But for this presentation, we're looking at this graph of ISU, from ISU. This graph shows the total number of bachelor degrees awarded to women in STEM fields over a 20-year period. So you can see that it starts in the fiscal year of 86 and goes through fiscal year 20. And this is only looking at the fall semester. And so by looking at this graph, you can see that there's been an uptick, specifically around that 2005, 2006 time frame. You can see that there's been a big uptick in women graduating in an undergraduate with an undergraduate degree in STEM majors. That's fantastic news. Over this 20-year span, more women are entering into the workforce that have not traditionally been necessarily, quote, open to women. And as fantastic as this concept of getting more women into STEM fields, if we look at this next graph, you can see that STEM is broken out a little bit more. And you can see that engineering, which is that red line at the bottom, continues to stay well below 20%. And that may be flattening out around that 15 to 18 range. Just to do another quick check-in with everybody in the chat, just looking at this graph, what are those two areas that you see the highest amount of STEM degrees being awarded to women? So where are those two highest amounts being awarded in women in undergraduate degrees? So go ahead and type that in the chat, and Crystal, if you can shout out a couple of those answers.
Yeah, will do. We'll wait for people to pop their answers in there.
Again, that red line is engineering. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, all I was going to say is it is a little bit small on the screen. So maybe if people want to identify by color versus title, that would be fine too.
Perfect.
But Emily's popped in with ag and life sciences and human sciences. And I guess maybe another way to think about that interaction is if you agree with Emily's suggestions, maybe go down to those reactions and give us a thumbs up, or if you disagree, you can type in the chat.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you. Sorry about that. About the chart being a little bit smaller than it is on my end. But yeah. So thank you, Emily, for giving those notes in the chat, and hopefully everyone else is seeing that same pattern of that agricultural and life sciences, medical, which would include both animal and human, as well as other life sciences, which sustainability falls into that as well. So yeah, definitely those human sciences, life sciences, agricultural area. Now, the first time I saw this chart, and seeing such high numbers of women around the medical fields, I quickly remembered a story that highlighted this concept of kind of certain fields are reserved for certain genders, or traditionally have been reserved for certain genders. I have a male friend who is a nurse, and I was introducing him to my daughter, who at the time was just about to turn 10 years old. And when I told her that he was a nurse, she asked, "But how can you be a nurse?" I then opened up that conversation a little bit more, and the literal words that came out of her mouth were, "I thought only girls could be nurses and boys had to be doctors." it was one of those moments where you just kind of like your heart sank and it's like, oh my gosh, I've failed as a parent around this topic. And I've thought that I've done all the right steps to prepare her and introduce her to the right information that would shape her understanding around that she could do whatever she wanted to, that she didn't have to be a nurse. She could be a doctor if she wanted to. She could be an engineer. She could do these things. But I realized that this was a sign of how quickly these stereotypes get formed into our youth. On our professional side of things, it showed me how valuable it is to have young children actually see both genders practicing in the fields to help overcome these stereotypes. So thinking about that, why is engineering a gender diversity desert? What is it about the engineering field that are deterring women from entering? Is it the lack of mentors and mentorships and simply seeing other women practicing in the field? Is it that there is a gender difference between the specific skills that weed women out in the field? Or is our educational system, is our society, our educational system as a whole set up to favor one gender over another in regards to these specific employment skills? I want you to think about that for a moment. And if you want to write down things, write down your thoughts. Sometimes writing things down help me kind of form pictures. So I always include that if that helps you. I want you to think back to your own experiences. Why do you think there is such a disparity in women when it comes to the engineering fields? Is it one of those three reasons listed, simply as seeing a lack of women practicing in the field as a young child, and that perception stays with them into adulthood? Is it the educational system that makes it more difficult for women to enter this field and to over another? Or are there elements or interconnections within those elements that are designed either intentionally or unintentionally to force women out? Or is it something else? Take a moment, write down some thoughts, think about what are some components that you think are creating this diversity desert when it comes to women in engineering.
Yeah. Patrick, we have a comment already in the box from Emily. She says, I agree, all three and then some. I'm also wondering if you would be open to people unmuting and sharing their immediate thought about this too, because I'm wondering if this is maybe just a bit much to type.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I 100%, anytime you want to take yourself off mute, go ahead and do that. Yeah, if you have some thoughts, go ahead and share those.
So again, just feel free to unmute yourself and join in, or use that chat. And we'll see what people have to say here.
Personally, something that I follow a lot, because I have a daughter who's of that age, around 7 or 9, and I think Barbie does a really great job of highlighting this, but there's that theory of the dream gap where society has different standards for girls than they do for boys when it comes to making a vision for yourself and what you're going to be in the future. And they hold girls to a higher standard of, is that realistic? You know, what are you going to slow down and have time for kids and a husband? You know, stuff like that. So we start implementing that in girls at a younger age than we do at boys. And at a very young age, their self-esteem is impacted to say, well, maybe I can't do that. And I can definitely see that happening with my daughter, because she's always wanted to be a zoologist. She is probably like the smallest environmentalist that you will ever meet. And even in class now, they're just like, well, you know, and it's not out of bad heartedness. It's just, you know, like, well, are you going to think about your kids, or how are you going to travel and do that if, you know, this, that, and the other thing? And it's just, it's disheartening to see that happen, because I do see it impact her self-esteem and saying like, well, maybe it is more cut out for boys and not cut out for me.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Yeah. We have a comment in the box from Rhonda. She says she thinks it's a lot of how people were raised and the era that they were raised. She believes that today's world is more open to women in all fields.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, maybe that that trend of engineers women in engineering in the undergraduate, if we go back to that chart that we highlighted just a little bit ago from ISU, maybe engineering is just lacking a little bit initially, and we're going to start seeing that uptick. Maybe we don't know exactly what the future is going to show us on that. Yeah. Are there any others?
Yeah.
Not,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Please,
Go ahead.
Jessica.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, Jessica, please go ahead. I just was going to say there are no other comments at this time.
Okay, I was just going to chime in with, I think the mentor thing really speaks a lot to me personally, just like the lack of mentorships. Even when Emily was talking about her daughter wanting to be a zoologist, obviously that kind of hits home because that's my field. And I am surprised by that comment because in my place of employment, we're a female dominated organization. We have more females here working than males. We have way more, the number of female zookeepers outweighs the number of male zookeepers by an exponent of 10 to 1. So it's pretty shocking to me to hear that someone has made comments to somebody about something like that within my field, because I never would have even imagined that. And so that makes me think that there's this lack of mentorship that out there, that telling kids, me personally, I'm not an outgoing person. So I do things that are familiar to me and what, I did the sports in high school that my siblings did because that's what my siblings did. And I didn't want to try something different. I was afraid to, go out and try new things. And so I think having that support and mentors might really be a key point there.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, and I think we're all in agreement that it's not only one, that there's definitely, I think it was Emily maybe said at the very beginning is yes, a combination of all three and then some. And that's definitely probably something that is reality. Thank you all very much for sharing your thoughts, both in chat and in over microphone. So thank you. And this chart is from 2019. This is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. This information provided that by the 20 years, the information provided by the 20-year study from ISU, if you compare that to this chart also, you can see that ISU data is following this trend nationally, where women only make up 28% of the total workforce in science, technology, engineering, and math. But of that 28%, engineering only accounts for 15%. So I'm going to say that again. Women only make up 28% of the total workforce in science, technology, engineering, and math. But of that 28%, only 15% accounts for engineering. And the areas where women nationally are at the highest are the biological and health sciences, including sustainability in there. So again, very similar statistics that what we saw compared to the 20-year study from ISU. And this gap gets even wider when you look at the advanced degrees, so beyond undergraduate degrees, and add another layer to it of race and ethnicity. According to the 2008 National Girls Collaborative Project, 86% of early career doctorate holders in science and engineering are either classified as white or Asian. Only 3.6% are classified as Latina, 2.7% as Black, and in fact, only 1 in 20 employed women scientists and engineers are Black women, Latinas, or other racially underrepresented in STEM. And we'll give you, provide these links. You can see the link down at the bottom. Say hello to that little blue dot. You can, we'll be able to provide you with these links also. So yes, having a gender disparity when it comes to, yes, we do have a gender disparity when it comes to the STEM fields, specifically in engineering, but that's only one part of the conversation when we look at race and ethnicity and how that can play an impact as well. So if we think back to our equity statements of where our goal is to bring others to the table, expand participation, create those open learning environments, ultimately increasing diversity. in this case specifically, we relate it to gender. What's missing as part of that equation? What's missing in that box? If we say we are teaching STEM to all, and in this case specifically engineering, but we see that our outcome is having this large gender and racial or ethnic disparity, what's inside that equation that is preventing us from achieving our desired income and creating that, and ultimately creating that diversity desert? From the AAUW, which I have to admit, I had to look this up, what this acronym stood for, which is the American Association of University Women. It's a non, so I like I said, I had to look that acronym up because I kept seeing AAUW, but I never could find actually what it stood for. But it is a nonprofit organization whose focus is to advance women in education, along with many other organizations. We know that there are some key components that are attributing to this disparity. We know, as we had already talked about, that there's lots of different combinations that are perpetuating this gender gap in STEM. Gender stereotypes, where certain jobs are reserved for specific genders, which could be that connected to role models. It's just a male-dominated culture, that there's discrimination and biases that are sometimes subtle and sometimes overtly outright. Having those few role models, not seeing necessarily women in those STEM fields. And also math anxiety, where a female educator may have math anxiety while teaching, and that may be passed on to their female students. This anxiety around a subject can also instill that having that fixed mindset in young students early on, one that can carry out with them through their entire educational careers. If you've ever heard that term or used this term yourself of "I'm not a math person," that comment is an example of how we can instill that fixed mindset into our young learners of saying that, creating that math anxiety to themselves. When I was preparing this presentation earlier in late October, early November, obviously it was right around the election time, and I heard several times reporters would repeat that phrase, "I'm not a math person," when they were reporting on the numbers coming in from the different counties. And so this concept is prevalent outside of the classroom also. So our young learners are hearing this from all over. According to the AAUW, girls show signs of starting to lose confidence in their math skills as early as 3rd grade. That's age 8. I was asking my daughter, and I remember asking her in 3rd grade, what some of her subjects were that she was excited about, and she never listed science because they weren't even teaching science in 3rd grade at that point. This just reinforces the need to have high quality STEM-based education early on and not waiting until those later grades to start introducing these topics. If we wait until 5th and 6th grade to start introducing the engineering principles and talking about that engineering mindset, we may be too late to form those connections, and which will only further this disparity. And if formal education isn't doing this inside the classroom, then as out of school providers, we need to step up and to help close this gap. Now, if somebody would have asked 5 years ago, Patrick, lead an astronomy lesson, I'd ask myself this question of well, wait a second, how am I going to teach a quality, insert any STEM activity right here, focused on math or science concepts when I'm not confident myself? How am I going to lead an astronomy lesson 5 years ago if I'm not knowledgeable enough or want to know about astronomy myself? So you may be asking this question, what are those features that make an activity great? And I totally get where you might be at on this journey of how do you answer this question. So let's take a step back and first ask ourselves, what are the components of any activity that makes it great or stand out? So what are those features of an activity that make it great? Go ahead and enter into the chat some of those things that you might think makes a program great. And Crystal, I'll ask you to chime in on this.
Absolutely. While we're waiting for responses to come in, Patrick, I just want to have you note the time. You have about 15 minutes before our scheduled end time.
Yep.
Okay. Carly says student engagement. Jessica says hands-on and interactive. Emily says engagement. And again, folks, if you're having trouble with the chat, feel free to unmute and just verbally share your answer too. How to capture the little mind and keep it focused. And then they followed that up with an LOL.
Nice. Definitely. Go ahead and start, keep on entering things into the chat. But yeah, it's things such as hands-on, student-led, having that engagement, being interactive, making sure that you're keeping their focus, making it relevant, appealing, appropriate. Exactly. Here are some of the areas that we focus on, which is exactly like what we just mentioned. You got to have that hands-on component, but more importantly, not just being physically active, you need to ensure that their minds are engaged as well. Having a positive relationship with the students, ensuring that the project or activity is student-led, that they have a voice and a choice in that direction. Keeping it relatable and having it connected personally to them somehow. That'll help with that focus component of the early learners, like we heard about. And giving it a real life problem component of one to solve helps make it more relevant to them. And one that is has multi avenues to get there. The answers don't always have to look the same. Having multiple pathways and multiple solutions, one that allows the students to explain their outcomes, their processes on how they got there, and it puts the student in the driver's seat rather than, the student is leading rather than the adult. This chart from the moonshot, Million Girls Moonshot, highlights those similar components of having that engineering mindset, exploring materials and evaluate and iterate as part of their hands-on, minds-on component, considering those real-world problems by making it relevant to the learner, envisioning multiple solutions down here at the bottom. Sorry, I was going to circle these as I talked about them. Considering those, envisioning multiple solutions to ensure that the component of having the learner take the lead and sharing their results to really make it shine. So we're going to quickly go through how you can maybe create one of these, focus on an engineering activity. So first of all, making it that relevant piece. Who here likes pizza? Yeah, so if anyone's ever had a pizza party for their birthday before, you may have gone to Chuck E. Cheese. I have to admit, I was a child of the 80s, so Chuck E. Cheese was not necessarily as friendly and cuddly in appearance as what Chuck E. Cheese looks like today. But if you think back to what Chuck E. Cheese is, you may have been exposed to something called animatronics. So if you think back to Chuck E. Cheese, or if you've ridden the Underground, which is a ride here at Adventureland, you may have seen animatronics as part of that ride as well. Animatronics are sometimes called the first robots because they are programmed to do something when something else happens. Over the years, animatronics, definitely like Chuck E. Cheese, as you can see, have definitely improved in their quality and appearance. You can see in this short video how the process works using that crank and cam system. You can see how the crank turns the cam, causing the other cam to move, etc. A cuckoo clock is another example of a animatronic as well. Today, some of these are programmed using a computer to do things on timers with the click of a button rather than a crank turn or to pull the chain down in a grandfather clock potentially. So today, we're going to explore ways that you can make your own automata. You can see in this first picture some of the materials you may need. I have a variety of sizes of dowel rods. In that first picture underneath materials, you can see that I've already cut some shapes from cardboard. There's the rectangle and a circle, scissors, foam colored sheets, and a container. Now you don't have to use a Fairway potato salad container, although I will say it's the second best potato salad I've ever had after my mom's, but any clear container will work. And the reason why you prefer a clear container is so just like in that last video that we saw, you can see the cam system actually working. But if you can't find a clear container, any container with a large cavity like this would work. One thing I would do, or what I have done, depending on the age level, is to pre-drill holes into the container prior to handing them out. But again, depending on the age and appropriateness of this step of who you're working with, it may be perfectly fine to give the students the drill for them to do this as well. Holes will need to be drilled on the top and then the two sides of the container across from another. And these are the holes that the dowel rods will be used, will be inserted into when you assemble your automata. One of the first steps is to create that base, which is over here in the alterations section. You can kind of see that. That base for the dowel for it to sit on while it moves up and down. So you can see two different examples of how you could do this. Now, again, I understand that this is in 2019 and earlier, this would probably be an in-person workshop, and it's a lot easier to hold up examples and do things. 2020, we're more in a virtual setting, so trying to do my best to show to walk through this process also. But if you have questions, we can definitely get you this information later too. You can see in these pictures where it says alterations, you can attach this dowel rod to the base in various different ways. The two pictures show hot glue and tape. You can also see that one is made out of wood, the other is made out of cardboard and dowel rods. So lots of different alterations that you can take for this step. The next step is to have that youth voice component where it's important. With the foam, you can create any shape or animal that you may want to attach to the top of this dowel. You can see that I decided to make an octopus and also make it fancy by putting a little top hat on it. So you can see that in these photos, the assembly of the automata. You can see that base down here is attached to the dowel rod that is attached to the octopus on top, and you can see that the cam system down here is that wheel or that circle. Now you want to make sure that that circle is offset just a little bit. It could be oblong, it could be like an egg shaped, or it could just be inserted at a different location so it's not in the center. So that's going to help create and push that base up and lower it as it moves across. And you can see one thing that I added to this was this yellow straw that was not present up here, but is added down here. What I was, as I was working through this process, what I was finding is that the dowel rod was getting caught on the pre-drilled hole that I had previously put into the top, and it was also causing it to not stay straight up. And so I added that straw for it to, as an insert for it to slide up and down a little bit easier and be free of any snags. So if we look back to this engineering mindset chart from Million Girls Moonshot, you can see that this is a great example of how students are working through the process, iterating and adapting their project and improving upon it, using the systematic design process, exploring the materials available, applying math and skills, etc. Which leads us to the question of what are some math concepts you could bring into this activity? You know, you could think about, well, what about the diameter of the cams that I'm using? Or what about the length of the rods? Or how many rotations it has to go around for it to create that up and down path? Or the angles that may be associated with it? What are some science-based concepts that you could bring into this activity? You know, what could you attach to that cam system up top? Well, it could be a predator-prey activity. It could be earth science and tectonics. It could be life cycles. You can expand this with technology and add programming to a Raspberry Pi or Arduino, doing virtual designing with 3D modeling and attaching that to the top of for the item that is moving up and down. And although this activity is primarily focused on teaching mechanical engineering, it does not require a high level of understanding of math formulas or for you as an instructor, but it did take reasoning, understanding, and a lot of trial and error to understand angles, various diameters, weights, etc. These are all concepts and skills that engineers do each and every day. And thinking about how you can adapt this for different audiences, Our younger learners, we can take an idea of maybe we use linkages and do something like the claw machine down here that we saw. We can attach dino teeth to it. We've all seen the dreaded claw machine in person or in Toy Story, where for only $1 you can get this plastic alien or the stuffed animal, and $37 later you're telling yourself the story of like, well, I almost had it that last time. So there's lots of different variations that you can adapt this for younger learners. For older learners, maybe looking at ways that you can expand on the different motions. Maybe you have 2 different motions or 2 different cams going up and down at the same time. Some practical tips to look at: make sure that the materials are appropriate for all genders, not that they're only traditional for male, but that we're expanding that. I know that there was a comment of like even down the toy aisle, it tends to be more male dominated. So making sure that the materials that you're using are gender appropriate, or at least not gender specific. Look for women currently in the field of study or college students that you could bring into this conversation. You know, the virtual world lends itself very well to this because society is pretty used to having these virtual meetups like this. So keep in mind who your audience is and find role models that may not always be well represented. Diversity is important. Looking back at the statistics we mentioned, it's not only a gender disparity in engineering, but it's also one in ethnic base as well, race and ethnic base as well. Be aware of your anxieties and learn to identify those to ensure that we're not unintentionally passing those along. So have that confidence built into there. Let the students take the driver's seat and give them the voice in the project. Many times they'll discover the answers themselves. Now I wanted to end with this video. It is a 12-minute long video. Crystal, do we have time for this?
Sorry, I couldn't get myself off mute. So we had originally scheduled an hour for this presentation, but if people are willing to stay on, we can certainly go through it, and that is perfectly fine.
All right.
What are people thinking? Can you maybe give me a thumbs up if you're able to watch the video? Looks like Carly has to get going. And Jessica needs to get going as well. So Sarah's able to stay on in view. Emily as well. So I'll tell you what, let's just go ahead and keep going. That way it'll be part of the recording. And if they want to come back and view this a little bit later, they certainly can. So
that's perfect. Okay. Yes. And again, I apologize. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So if you do have to go, totally understand. For those of you that are able to stay, we'll go ahead and continue. This is recorded, like Crystal said. So we are able to access this later as well. So if you want to look at this video and you're not able to stay now, it's just a YouTube video. It's TEDx video. It's called Engineering, Where Are the Girls? So I'll go ahead and start this.
If the cure for cancer is in the mind of a junior high girl, the odds are that we'll never find it. Because research shows that by the time that girl is in 2nd grade, both boys and girls are well acquainted with the notion that math is for boys. So by the time she reaches junior high school, she will have been laboring under those confidence-zapping stereotypes that say girls can't do things like math and science for at least half a dozen years. Couple that with the fact that the absolute last thing a girl in junior high wants to do is to stand out or be different. And it's no wonder that we lose many bright, capable young women in junior high school because they turn away from math and science at the very time in their lives when so many opportunities in those areas begin to open up for them. Now, it is true that by the time she reaches high school, that today in the United States, 50% of advanced placement calculus students are women. But it's also true 3 months later, when those high school seniors reach the college campus as freshmen, that only 17% of engineering majors are women. And surprisingly, that number hasn't changed in over 20 years. So the odds of that junior high girl getting the education she needs to see her dream of curing cancer become a reality, well, those odds are slim. So why is that? What's going on? What's the problem? Well, largely it's us. It's our society, our culture, if you will. Because we're the ones, whether on purpose or unintentionally, we perpetuate those antiquated, inaccurate, and to be perfectly honest, damaging stereotypes that say things like girls can't do engineering and science. But it's more than that. You see, those stereotypes fuel a lot of what's called implicit or unconscious or unintentional bias against women in engineering and science. And that implicit bias, it turns out, is more damaging than the stereotypes themselves. You see, implicit bias affects our attitudes, our reactions, our expectations of women in engineering and science. It also fuels a continual stream of what are called micro inequities or micro insults aimed at women. Things which by themselves may not look like such a big deal, but collectively, together, over a career, over a lifetime, they can add up to a lot. And they can make it really difficult for a girl or a woman in engineering or science to stick with it, to contribute, to live up to her potential, to dream. Let's look at an example of implicit bias. Research tells us that we all find it really challenging to view a woman in a traditionally male field like engineering or science as competent. We tend to devalue her contributions and dismiss her accomplishments. Let's say that you've been appointed to a new committee at work, and the charge for your committee is to hire an engineer. If I make up a resume for an engineer, just totally make it up, put anything on it that I want to, and I take that resume and I put a man's name at the top, like David. Then I take that same resume and I put a woman's name at the top, say Maria. And I take those identical resumes for David and Maria and I submit those to the hiring committee. Then research shows that the committee will evaluate David as more qualified than Maria every time, even though their resumes are identical. In fact, research suggests that Maria would have to be as much as 2.5 times more competent than David to be rated equal with him. 2.5 times. Wow. It's no wonder we don't have a lot of women and girls in engineering and science. But it doesn't stop there. It turns out that K-12 teachers are susceptible to implicit bias. Research shows that teachers call on boys more in math class than they do girls. That's true even when the teachers think that they're calling on boys and girls the same. It turns out that those stereotypes that say things like girls can't do math and science affect more than just the second graders. It's also true in things like symphony orchestra tryouts. When symphony orchestras go to a double-blind review system, one where the judges and the musicians who are trying out can't see each other, then the number of women that secure traditionally male spots like first chair trumpet skyrocket. You see, if the judges can see the gender of the musicians who are trying out, then their implicit biases, things like women don't play with as much power as men, actually affect their ability to accurately judge what they're hearing. It's the fact that implicit bias is unintentional or unconscious, that we're not even aware that we're doing it, that makes it so damaging. We think that we're being fair and unbiased, when in reality, we're acting in ways that many times are exactly opposite our intended values. Now, I know what you're thinking, but this isn't a guy thing. Research shows that women, that me, that we are just as guilty of implicit bias in all of these situations as men are. It's not a guy thing. Like I said earlier, it's a culture thing, but it's our culture, and we can change it if we want to. We can educate ourselves about implicit bias and its damaging effects. We can look out for its influence on our behavior and our attitudes. We can insist on using objective criteria when we evaluate people instead of subjective opinions. We can do all of those things. We just have to decide that it's important enough to do so. Now, while it's true that our society perpetuates a lot of stereotypes about who can do engineering and science, it's also true that we perpetuate a lot of stereotypes about the disciplines of engineering and science themselves. And those stereotypes turn girls away. I mean, we portray engineers as lonely nerds in white lab coats working on boring theoretical projects in laboratories, when in reality, research shows that girls, and increasingly today, all millennial students, both boys and girls, are far more interested in helping and doing good than they are in building a bigger, better, faster rocket ship. Fortunately, the opportunities to help and do good in engineering and science have never been greater. In 2004, the National Academy of Engineering came out with a list of what they called 14 grand challenges for engineering in the 21st century. Large, complex, interdisciplinary problems facing our world today. Things like coming up with sustainable solutions for our burgeoning energy needs, or developing new treatments and medicines for diseases, or addressing infrastructure issues, things like crumbling roads and bridges and access to clean water, all of which provide unlimited opportunities for engineers and scientists to help and do good. We just need to get that message out to our kids, to our second grade girls. Because if we wait until junior high or high school to start sending the message that a career in engineering and science can give you opportunities to make the world a better place, well, it's too late. So all of this may be well and good, you're thinking, but in the end, what does it really matter? Research shows that starting in kindergarten, that girls study more than boys do, that they value school more than boys do, that they make better grades than boys do. So it should be no surprise that women now outnumber men in college 3 to 2, and they're also more likely to graduate from college than men are. Now, I'm the mom of a 21-year-old son who's sitting back there, who's majoring in engineering in college. So on the one hand, I know that this data is telling us that we have got to do a better job of engaging boys in school. On the other hand, I know that the data is telling us that if we aren't attracting girls and women to engineering and science, then we aren't going to be producing many engineers or scientists. At the very time in our nation's history when we're under increasing pressure to maintain an innovative edge in the world economy and to solve increasingly complex and challenging scientific and technical problems, all of which requires a substantial pool of engineering and science talent. Something I might add that many other countries don't seem to have much problem producing. Moreover, if we want to solve those really challenging scientific and complex problems, it turns out that we need a diverse team. People of different genders, people from different races, people from different socioeconomic classes, different parts of the country. Because research shows if you want to come up with an innovative solution to a really challenging problem, then a diverse team will trump a team of experts every time. So, if we want that cure for cancer to be there when we need it, then we all have to work at getting the message out to our girls that not only can they do engineering and science, but that we need them to do engineering and science. We need them to dream about using engineering and science to make the world a better place. Because the dreams of that junior high girl aren't just the key to building her future, they're the key to building our future. Thanks.
I think that they that summed it up very well. Of especially with that last line of the dreams of that junior high girl aren't just the key to building her future, but they're the key to building our future. Kind of wrapping up, as mentioned in the video, she mentioned the National Academy of Engineering Grand Challenges. 2 of those 14 were identified as addressing sustainable solutions for our energy needs. And the second one, another one, was to develop new treatment for medical issues. Well, we already know that the biological and life sciences are where we're seeing that increase of where we already have that interest for women in STEM careers. We just need to start showing how engineering is connected to that. These are 2 of the same areas that we have that population are already interested. We just need to start combining those disciplines together. We need to show the connection to engineering to ensure that we are creating that diverse team of leaders to solve the complex grand challenges for our future. We need to inspire and show girls there's no one gender that can do engineering and science, or one gender that can be a doctor or a nurse. Let's, reflecting back on that, the Million Girls Moonshot mission of reimagine. Let's reimagine who can be an engineer, who can build, and who can make. And by doing that, we can reimagine the future. But we can only accomplish this by ensuring we are creating inclusive and equitable spaces for our youth to explore, engage, and be inspired. These are a few resources that are available. Some of these are these are all specific to Million Girls Moonshot. The second one there is an engineering mindset document with some really great graphics. Again, this is recorded, so you'll be able to come back to these 3 resources. But I wanted to make sure that we provided these as well as an extension to this. Some future dates, if you're excited about these topics and want to continue on, our next one is December 2nd, building strong mentor opportunities for your STEM program. So I encourage you to jot these dates down. And I know Crystal's going to do an excellent job of keeping everybody informed of these ongoing professional development virtual sessions. So be sure to check these out. And to end this morning, I just want to end with this one last slide that says, "The future never just happened, it was created," from Mae Jemison, who was the first African-American woman to travel to space. Thank you all very much for joining, and I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Again, let's give Patrick a clapping hands emoji down there at the bottom, because I think he did a wonderful job today. So thank you, everybody, for your time today. As Patrick said, this is going to continue with our next presentation being on December 2nd, where we will be discussing how to build mentorship opportunities to support your STEM program. I'll be sending out an email link to the distribution list, and of course it'll be in various newsletters so that you can access it there. This recording will be made available on our brand new website, and that announcement will be coming out through email as well. You'll be able to access this recording at any time. And other exciting news connected to that website, we are also working on building a lesson plan repository, which is going to be a really nice way for you to go to this website and simply grab a lesson plan for whatever age group of youth you're working with and a topic that you're interested in, and you'll be able to fully implement that with the kids that you're working with. So that's something that we will be rolling out in the spring, and it should be a very exciting, very engaging tool for people to have as you continue to do the great work you do with kids. I am also going to be emailing the group today and asking you to take just a couple of minutes to complete a SurveyMonkey link that will allow us to continue to expand and further develop these professional development offerings. And with that being said, again, just want to thank everybody for your time. And if you have questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, or you can reach out to me through email individually, and I'll be happy to answer those. So take care, everybody. I hope you have a great day. Stay safe this holiday season, and don't be afraid to reach out if you have any questions or needs. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.